What's going on, everybody? It is that time again. The Sooners Illustrated Podcast, episode 85,
85.
on this Monday, May 20th, 2024. Josh Callaway, James D. Jackson, Tom Green with you on a Monday. Lots of sports. We're going to cover a lot of ground on the program today. We've got football, defensive tackle portal search continues, but do they need to add another guy? We'll talk about that a little bit. Also, basketball appears to be done in the portal. Are they going to be any good? We'll talk about that. And then James and I, of course, will recap the weekends that were for the Diamond Sports on the back end of the show. Softball's on to the Super Regionals, and the baseball team starts their postseason this week with the Big 12 baseball tournament. So a lot to talk about, lots of different sports, lots of ground to cover on a Monday. Apologies off the top for my hoarse voice. I'm going to try not to cough or sneeze into the mic. That's the goal of the show, battle a little bit of a cold, but we persevere. I'm going to let Tom and James do the heavy lifting today. We'll start with the football stuff. Like I said, the defensive tackle portal chase here, right? So we talked about this last week with Colin, Brandon Lane from Stephen F. Austin, and then Aiden Huntington from UL Monroe. This is all after Jermaine Lole flipped. Most fans know the context of all this. You mix in Pete Thamel, reported this morning from ESPN, that Jacksonville State defensive lineman Chris Hardy is set to probably take a visit to Oklahoma this week. My question to you guys, I'm just going to pose it like this, because we talked about this a little bit with Colin last week. Do they need to add another guy? I mean, they added Dominic Williams from TCU, obviously, who's probably going to start, right, alongside Deshaun Terry. But then we talked about the depth there before. Like, it's in a pretty decent place with Grayson Halton, all the names that we talked about a bunch. The freshmen, obviously. In your guys' opinion, are they better off just rolling with what they have, using that scholarship elsewhere, maybe on the roster if you want to go down that rabbit hole? Or would it be good to add another body as a maybe rotational piece? Just what's kind of your guys' feel and summary of the defensive line recruitment right now as they look to maybe add another body to this room?
Yeah, I think, they don't necessarily need, like, it's not a pressing need for them now, especially after adding Dominic Williams. Like, that is, you land a guy like Dominic Williams, you cure a lot of your woes and a lot of your concerns that you had about that position just because, plug and play guy, all conference level, all American level talent there who can kind of hold down that starting spot. And, you can work in some of these other newer pieces behind him without needing to lean heavily on them necessarily. But would you feel better if they added one more piece up front? Probably. Just because the line of scrimmage is really physical in the SEC. Like, having that added depth really helps. Now, whether that's adding someone like a Brandon Lane or an Aiden Huntington, who we've discussed at length the last couple of weeks, or even adding someone like Chris Hardy, who's more of an edge, but maybe can add a little bit more inside and shift inside, or give you more pass rush from the interior if you wanted to shift him inside at some point. I mean, he's a guy that Zach Alley is obviously very familiar with. He was a All-Conference USA first-team performer last season at Jacksonville State under Zach Alley. 61 tackles, 16 for a loss. 8.5 sacks, 37 total pressures. Like, he's a guy that Zach Alley is very familiar with and obviously knows can produce. So if they want to go that route and add a little Zach Alley flavor to this defense going into this first year, but again, I don't think they necessarily need one, but I think it's a luxury at this point if they can find one that they feel can add to that room.
That's kind of where I'm at, Tom. Like, you don't really need it based on all the guys. I mean, you kind of have, like, you got Dominic Williams, Dejon Terry, Grayson Halton, David Stone, Jaden Jackson. I mean, those are really solid names, really solid guys that you can have on that front line of defensive line. But it's also one of those things of, like, why not do it? I mean, why not? If you have the resources to go after another guy, and clearly they look like they do, because, as you said, Pete Thamel making that report, more guys are visiting and things like that. It shows that the OU does have some interest in some other guys. And so why not go after them? Why not add that another piece if you can? Because it's not like they're just adding pieces that can't play at the SEC level and just adding a body to add a body, which is something I've never agreed with. But if you add somebody that can actually play at that level and be effective for your team and help you out in practice and they don't play in the game, why not do it? And so I think that's where OU is at right here when you ask the question, if should they don't necessarily need to, but it's just like, why not? Why not at this point in time?
Yeah, it's one of those things, like you said, like Josh, you alluded to, is like, oh, do you get defensive line help or do you try to fill a spot somewhere else? They don't really have any other holes on that defense that they need to address. Like, they feel good about safety. Feel good about the quarterback room. Obviously, the linebackers are really good. So if you can add another body up front on it, like that was the one question mark on this defense going into the spring, and still was one coming out of the spring before Dominic Williams committed. So if you can find an additional body to throw into that mix, and they talk about competitive depth. We hear the phrase "iron sharpens iron" all the time. Like if you can add someone that you think can tangibly improve that room, whatever role that is, then go for it. But I don't think they feel pressured right now to add another defensive lineman just for the sake of adding a defensive lineman after you brought in a guy like Dominic Williams.
Mm-hmm. And I think being in the SEC, like this conference, as we all have alluded to many times, it's like it's a line of scrimmage league. Like, so having the best guys the most guys that can play at that position is really key. I mean, you saw it in the Big 12 where, wide receivers, quarterbacks were so important for that conference because there was so much offensive scoring and offensive ability throughout the conference. It's like you got to keep up with that now in the new conference. So defensive line is very, very important in this. And so that's just another reason why, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it would probably make for a better show if I, argued with you guys, said, no, they really need one, but I'm with you. I mean, it's the same page. I mean, I really don't think they have to have one of these guys, and look, I mean, look where they're coming, they're not, it's not like there's a big fish like a Dominic Williams hanging out there. Like, yeah, obviously, if something like that, these are players that are in the spring portal. They're coming from lower level programs. We're talking about Stephen F. Austin, UL Monroe, and a Jacksonville State. Now, Zach Alley obviously would have that, connection with them. He knows what they're getting a little bit there. But so you're not adding anybody that's probably going to just completely change your defense. Probably. Mm-hmm. Maybe you do. Sometimes you get diamonds in the rough. So I'm kind of with you guys. I mean, I think probably what they have on the roster right now, whether it's giving the freshmen a lot of snaps, or playing a lot of Grayson Halton or a lot of Marcus Strong or Devon Sears, all those guys we talked about a lot. I think you're fine either way. I mean, if you end up landing one of these guys, great. But if you don't, I don't think we're going to be sitting here talking about, big swing and a miss this offseason to not get a second D tackle. I think the big fish was Williams. That would have been the real gut punch to not get. You did. So you bought yourself the cushion of you can kind of just examine guys that you're kind of interested in, and if it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So I'm with you guys. I think it's not a dire need, but if they do, cool. It'll be a nice little ad. But if they don't, they're fine too, which is, again, probably more of a fun topic if we had a more harsh either way, but that's kind of just the reality of the situation. So
I guess to make this topic more fun, let's just try to spice it up. I mean, what would be a scenario to where you're actually worried about where this defensive line is based on the guys that they have? Like, what would be that scenario? I mean, like, the talent seems to be there is my point. Yeah. So, like, how could this get any worse at this point? Or get worse, not any worse?
I guess probably one of the two main guys getting hurt, right? I mean, probably DeJohn Terry or Dominic, especially Terry, because he has the most – he is so experienced relative to the rest of the room. So I think that's a guy you need to keep healthy, keep on the field, I think, from week one to the end. Are you with me on that, Tom?
Yeah, definitely. Just to play devil's advocate here, talking about D-line help, do you guys think they should prioritize a guy like a Brandon Lane or Aiden Huntington, or do you think they should go with someone like Chris Hardy, who isn't necessarily a defensive tackle, but is someone that one of your coaches is intimately familiar with, knows what he can get out of that guy, and might not necessarily address a need as much, but is someone who is a little bit more of a known commodity to your staff?
Mm-hmm. I think I'm going with the biggest guy. I think Brandon Lane is the biggest guy of them all at this point, 300 pounds. I think that would be more helpful for this team because I like where the edge rushes are on this team. I like Aiden Huntington's not going to play right on the center because of his size. He's going to play a little bit off, in the gap and things like that. So I think getting an actual full-size nose guard would kind of be the best situation to have, in terms of depth and stuff like that. What you got, Josh?
Yeah, it's tough because, like you said, Tom, if you bring in Hardy, Zach Alley knows him, right? I mean, he's bringing him in with a role in mind that he feels confident he can fill because he's been around him, right? So it is kind of tough. It is kind of tough because I agree with James. Yeah. I mean, you really need more interior help if Hardy's going to be more of an outside guy, but I can be talked into either way. So I'm kind of, the fact that if you're an OU fan and you just want to put trust in your coaches, if you bring in Hardy, you're at least feeling like, okay, well, at least Zach Alley knows this guy and he must he must at least believe after having been around him that he can help the team in some form or fashion. He must have told Brent Venables, this guy will make a difference, right? And so that's, I think, the spin zone there. Whereas if you get one of the other two guys, they're just thinking and they're hoping, whereas you have a lot better idea, right, when it's a guy that Zach Kelly's been around. So, if you're only going to get one of the three, I think that would be the one that you could sell yourself on, even though maybe it's – I guess it's more like the highest floor, lowest ceiling type of situation.
Yeah, and like you said, all three of these guys are coming from a lower level of football. One FCS guy, two G5 guys. But, Aiden Hunting – or Chris Hardy, rather. I mean, he's a guy that also has other SEC interest. He's just coming off a visit to Ole Miss. So he's a guy that multiple SEC programs think can – play at that level. So that's something to keep in mind too. While I don't think, you necessarily need an edge, I agree you kind of need more of an interior guy at this point if you wanted to add one. I would kind of lean Huntington, even though he's a little bit smaller, just because I think he's a better pass rusher. And if you can generate a more consistent pass rush from those defensive tackle spots, it just opens up so much more for your defense and raises that ceiling altogether. So for me personally, I don't need either Huntington or Hardy. Can make an argument for either one if you were to take one. But I think, again, if they can land any one of those three, they'll feel, very good about a room that they've already improved the stock of since the end of spring practice.
Yep. All right, one on each guy. And there you have it. So we'll see obviously how that goes. Our own Colin Kennedy on Sooners Illustrated has been all over all the portal stuff. So become a VIP subscriber. Keep with all our national 24/7 guys. We'll be sure to let you know how this all plays out, as they aren't really too under the gun here. That's kind of the nice thing. They have time. These guys don't have to rush their decisions. I mean, it's late May. They got some time to kind of figure it out. So we'll see if they bring more guys in for visits or how that all plays out. But we'll be sure to keep you posted, and we'll keep talking about it more on the show as more developments become available, obviously. Let's shift over to basketball a little bit, and we'll let Tom go. Colin and I talked about the two latest transfer ads that they picked up at the end of last week with Wagi, I think that's how you say it. I watched a bunch of videos. Muhammad Wagi from Alabama, and then Jeff Nwanko, the JUCO ad. So the roster's done if Jalen Moore is back. If Jalen Moore leaves, it's an open spot. But for now, we're operating on the assumption that Jalen Moore will be back. So, Tom, Colin and I broached, we kind of a little bit scratched the surface of what the team will be like next year. Well, I really want to get your thoughts as, you and I were at, all the games last year. You've been doing some great analysis pieces on these new guys to kind of let fans know what to expect with these new players. From having been around the team last year, so you have a good idea of the known commodities that are back, and you've been looking in these new guys, just give me your thoughts on what this team's going to be. And, James, you're welcome to chip in as well if you'd like. But just where are you at on what this team's going to be next year? I mean, I'm not making you ask you to make a record prediction in May, but where they kind of fall right now.
We need
your
record
expectations?
I was going to say, I think it's hard to kind of project what this team is going to look like in terms of just pecking order in the SEC. Certainly, they're not at the top, but it was a difficult transfer portal period in some aspects. I mean, they clearly missed on some of their top targets. Brandon Garrison, Kevin Overton, Sean Padula, those local guys that they were trying to bring home. But I think they did a pretty good job of pivoting to some Plan B options. And I really like some of these pieces that they're bringing in. I think Jaden Jones is, not. I don't want to make a one-for-one comparison, but I think he's a guy that can be very similar to what Rivaldo Suarez brought to that team as kind of a 3-and-D guy who, if given the right opportunity, can step into a bigger role and be an impact player. Obviously, 38% shooter from beyond the arc last season. He was a Big West Defensive Player of the Year 2 years ago. Led all guards in the league and blocked shots last season. Just has a good defensive mindset. And obviously, Porter Moser, his teams kind of pride themselves on being tenacious on defense. Another guy I'm pretty high on is Bryson Goodine. He brings something that this team has lacked in Porter Moser's first few seasons. They have been kind of a middle of the pack 3-point shooting team. I think anywhere from 34 to 36% the last 3 seasons. This is a guy who's a career 40% shooter, shot 47% from beyond the arc last season on like 5.5 attempts per game. Just a dead-eye shooter who's even better in catch-and-shoot situations. I think he was like 49%. He was like the 3rd best three-point shooter in the country last season. That is a good addition to bring off the bench because I think he's going to be, one of those first guys off the bench, a 6th starter. He was 6th man of the year in his league last season. And then a guy like Jeff Wonko, you do get one of these Oklahoma kids to come home in a sense, not one of the top targets that you were looking for, but he's a guy I think has a high ceiling. It's always interesting with the JUCO transfers because, it's a little bit more difficult to see like how their game translates from JUCO to D1, but he was a first team All-American last season. Just a natural athlete. He's a guy who, coming out of high school, was a wide receiver who signed at Tulane, spent a season playing college football before, realizing, his heart was in basketball because he'd only played like a year of high school football, I believe. James might be a little bit more familiar with that, but, just a natural athlete who, grew up playing basketball, and that's where he decided, he wanted to pursue his future, had to go JUCO route. Really blossomed last season, and like the last 6 weeks of the season for them, he was averaging like 25 points a game. He was just on an absolute heater. Kind of a 3-level scorer, doesn't need to dribble a whole lot to get his shots, which, I know a lot of Oklahoma fans are going to be happy to hear that. But again, I like some of these pieces. I want to see how they all fit together. And certainly, like you said, we expect Jalen Moore to be back, but he's that guy that you need to kind of take that next step, because there were stretches last season where Jalen Moore was their best all-around player, and you need that. He is probably your most physical guy. I think there's still questions about, some length on this team in the front court. Obviously, Sam Godwin's probably going to be your projected starter at center. I don't think the transfer from Alabama, I don't think he is a difference maker per se, but he gives you a big body that you didn't necessarily have, and he's a defensive first guy. So I think he's a nice complementary piece at center as a backup option behind Godwin. But I don't think he's the type of guy that's just going to make you go, wow, this is the difference between this team making and missing the tournament right now. But yeah, I just want to see how some of these guys work together. I think Duke Miles and Kobe Elvis are quality pickups, but again, how do they translate their game to the SEC after playing at some lower level schools?
I think it's safe to say I would be surprised if they somehow played better, this season this coming season than they did last season. I think because of the guys they're bringing in are kind of like the lower level, lower than division, like the Power 4, Power 5 level in basketball, coming up to that. They're bringing a lot of those guys in. Like on the football side, we're talking about this defensive line, but it's just like the guys that you're adding for depth pieces. On the basketball side, it's like you're adding those guys to be your guys, because the roster was just, so depleted from the transfer portal. And so I think that's the most worrisome part of it, is you don't know if those guys are going to just all of a sudden step up in the moment, because obviously basketball is different. When you can play, you can probably make a statement, even if not that you weren't the guy at your last school, you could all of a sudden be the guy here just from comfortability and not more opportunity and things like that. And so that's what's so weird about it. I would be surprised, but it's just like, I don't know where to go from it right now. I know when we see practices and see these guys together, I think we'll have a better assumption of what it's going to be. And now Tom's going to be out there a lot looking at that. And so I think that's just where I'm at this point in time, because from the outside looking in, it doesn't seem like it's going to be the greatest of classes and seasons for the Oklahoma Sooners basketball. Sure.
Yeah. I think another way to look at it is, kind of do a 1-for-1 comparison of, what they lost and what they're bringing in. Like, is Kobe Elvis going to be better than Javion McCollum? Probably not. Yeah. Is Duke Miles going to be more productive than Los was last season? I think there's an argument there that you might upgrade that. Even though, look, lots of people still think Los Uzan is going to be a very good player. Obviously, Kelvin Sampson, who's got a history of developing good point guards, believes in him, brought him down there to Houston to fill that void after Jamal Shead left. But I think that for what Oklahoma does, I think Duke Miles could be a better point guard than what Los Uzan was last season. Like I said, Jaden Jones, I don't think he's better than Waldo Suarez, but I think it's a pretty close 1-for-1, exchange there if you're trying to fill that specific void. Bryson Goodine, I think, is an improvement over Latrey Darthard as kind of that backup guy off the bench as a kind of guard wing type player. Certainly a better shooter. He's a better volume shooter than anybody on Oklahoma's roster last season. And then a guy like Jeff Monco, I think he has a high ceiling where, he can offset the loss of Otega Owe. I think obviously Owe, 4-star caliber player. He's going to Kentucky now, and he's a guy that a lot of people are still high on, but things just never clicked for him. His shot was never really consistent here. I think Jeff Monco is a more natural shooter, has a better form, and could give you a little bit more production than what Owe was giving, even if again, I expect him to be a guy that comes off the bench to fill a role kind of like Owe was down the stretch of the season. So I think in some aspects, they made pretty comparable replacements here. I agree with James. I think it's going to be difficult to have a better season than they had last season when they won 20 games and missed the tournament. But again, we'll know more when we see, how this roster kind of gels together and what it looks like as the season approaches.
I'm honestly curious to see, now with these departures and other guys coming in, what type of opportunity that Dayton Forsythe gets from Dale High School in Oklahoma. Because Josh and I, we got a chance to watch him in high school. Yeah. This guy's a big game performer. Like, he steps up in the moment. And so will he get that type of opportunity to be like a Trae Young for this team? He isn't projected to be that great as of right now, but I think he could surprise a lot of people with his skill set and what he's able to do. Could that be the dark horse for what this season could be? That's kind of what I'll be most curious about, especially on the men's side of basketball here.
I think the bigger question might even be what does a role look like for Jacob Cole this season? Yeah, he's another guy that came in, 4-star prospect in that class last season, redshirted, didn't see the court at all just because the way college basketball's redshirt rules work compared to football. But, he had a foot injury in the offseason, never really seemed to get on track last season. But, just the other day, I think he posted a workout video of some of his offseason workouts away from the team right now. Mm-hmm. And, he's moving well. He's a, big wing that, could have a considerable role on this team this season. I'm kind of anxious to see what his development has looked like going into his second year, especially as a guy who we didn't get to see at all on the court last season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, as we've seen, last couple of years. Well, I mean, all of Moser's tenure, he doesn't really play freshman. Last year we were asking that all year. Where is Caden Cooper, especially? I mean, Jacob Cole is pretty clear they're redshirting him. But Caden Cooper, obviously, the whole season that was one of the big storylines. Now, the previous year, Los Uzan and Otega eventually became starters, but that team also stunk. It was a kind of a last ditch, like, let's just try something move. I mean, that team was below 500. They were not any good. They were last place in the Big 12, right? So he's not inclined to play freshman. I'll put it that way. Like, it's not going to be his preferred option.
Yeah, that's my point. Like, is he going to now make that opportunity, like, give that opportunity to Dayton Forsythe when he's coming in?
Sure. Right. So we'll see. Tom, would you dare to take a stab at the starting lineup? Because this is,
oh my goodness.
Okay.
Because I look at it, and it's like, man, it's hard because there's a bunch of guys you can talk me into.
I'm out on this one.
I think right now you're looking at a starting lineup of Duke Miles, Kobe Elvis, Jaden Jones, Jalen Moore, and Sam Godwin.
Okay, yeah, I could see that.
With I think your first options off the bench being Bryson Goodine, Jeff Lonko, Jacob Cole, and then you're probably going to turn to Muhammad Wawe when you need minutes at that 5 spot. I'm curious to see if Porter kind of expands his rotation a little bit more.
Like where does Luke Northweather fit into that?
Yeah, Luke Northweather, Jacob Cole. Where do those guys kind of fit in? Because if you can play 9 guys reliably instead of 7 or 8, probably keeps your team fresher down the stretch. But if you were to ask me right now, I think it's Duke Miles, Kobe Elvis, Jaden Jones, Jalen Moore, and Sam Godwin as your starting five on opening night.
Yeah, probably a safe bet there. And we'll see. Obviously, we have a whole offseason kind of figured out more as we go, but it's an interesting team. I'm not willing. I certainly don't. I'm trying to find the right way to word it. I'm not.
You're not throwing in the towel on them.
Yeah, I'm not saying they're going to be horrible. I'm definitely not sitting here saying like, oh, clearly this is a tournament roster either.
Yeah.
Remains to be seen. A lot of unknown commodities here. And like kind of James said, a lot of guys who like, how will they translate up a level? And you're kind of banking on a lot of guys to do that. Could happen. But also it's, never know. So we'll see. Going to be an interesting team. Still waiting on that Jalen Moore decision. He has another like week plus, I think. It's like 28th or 29th. 29th. So we'll know officially one way or another very soon. Again, I have to assume he's going to be back. But we'll know for sure soon. And that's a big swing because that's probably the best player on the team right now. You need him, to say the least.
Yeah, I will say, even though, they've had to pivot with some of their, portal options this offseason, I think there were some areas where they really addressed some needs. Obviously, 3-point shooting, adding a little bit more length on the perimeter, but also just bringing in a couple of guys who have NCAA tournament experience, which nobody on this roster had last season.
For sure.
It's a small thing, but it's also not a small thing when you have guys who have played in March like that before at the highest level. So I think that's something that shouldn't necessarily be overlooked when kind of discussing some of these additions.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
For sure. All right, well, I think that's it for the front end of the show. We'll let Tom go, and James and I will do some Diamond Sports talk on the other side as softball wins Super Regionals and Big 12 Baseball Tournament coming up this week. So, Tom, appreciate you, sir. And we'll hit some Diamond Sports here with James and I. All right, we've now shifted over to the Diamond Sports portion of the program. James, you were in Norman all weekend long at Love's Field for the regionals, and OU softball did their thing. 3-0, beat Oregon a couple times. They're on to Supers next week, which we'll talk about a little bit in a minute. As juicy of a matchup as you could possibly have in the Supers, pretty much. We'll get there in a second. But first, just kind of recap the weekend, what you saw. We talked about this a little bit after the Big 12 tournament last week. Felt like they maybe found a little something. Felt like they kind of kept it going this weekend. I was out of town, but I caught a pretty good chunk of the middle game on Saturday. Where Kelly Maxwell just shoved. What was it like from your perspective with how well they played? And, they're on to Supers now, obviously.
So we've talked about the hitting enough. Like that was the biggest problem after the season. Seems to be that's going well now. I think the two biggest things that I've seen during this postseason that includes the Big 12 tournament and just the regional just now is Nicole May, first of all. We had questions about what she was going to do and how she was going to handle her big moments. And she has answered that calling for sure. I mean, getting that Big 12 championship win in the for that tournament, and then coming out, and I got these stats from the OUSID. Nicole May was 2-0, had 15 strikeouts across 10 innings, and only gave up 8 hits, 0 walks, and 1 earned run throughout her time. So, like, just phenomenal from her. Like, she was dominant, and so having that comfortability with her coming in, because Kirsten Deal, who we thought was going to be the second best rotational piece, for OU, she didn't even pitch during this regional this weekend. Like she didn't even come out. So like to have an arm like that, not even show up and still win like this is amazing. I mean, it's just phenomenal for this team because Kelly Maxwell, for some reason, Oregon just can never hit Kelly Maxwell. I don't know what it is. It's just one hit across every outing she has against them. And that kind of goes back to her days at OSU's. Like they can't handle her. I don't know what it is. So she was phenomenal, and add Nicole May with that. It was an unstoppable force for that offense, which is why they ruled Cleveland State and then beat Oregon twice. And the other point I want to talk about is the surgence of the freshmen, Cassidy Pickering and Ella Parker. Ella Parker obviously was the most outstanding player in the Big 12 tournament. She earned that award. And then Cassidy Pickering, I mean, she just came out, and especially against Oregon, she had we called it the Cassidy Pickering game, just 2 home runs, 3 for 3. I mean, it was incredible from her. Like, the freshmen are coming up and stepping up in big moments, and it just helps so much because you already have this senior class who is the greatest senior class of all time. So if they're all going to play like this, there's no team that's going to beat them. Like, it's just no team that's going to beat them this year. I just don't see it happening. If they can continue to play like this, now that's the biggest thing. Can they keep this up? Now it's the biggest thing because, as you said early in the season, they've shown that they can lose a series. They've done it twice now.
Right.
Texas and Oklahoma State, who are going to be the teams you're going to have to face in the end, is what we're assuming. So that's the biggest thing. But as of right now, this team just looks dominant, man. It just looks all around. It look completely full of what they need. Outside of Sydney Sanders, maybe her hitting, she's had a slump here for quite some time. And that's the biggest question mark, I think, for this team. But everybody seems really comfortable with what's going on the offensive side.
They look like OU softball again, right? I mean, it was all season. It kind of, even when they were really winning, again, we said it a bunch of times, so spoiled out here, OU fan. I mean, the team has been so hilariously dominant for the last, really, obviously, a long time, going back just beyond these last 3 years. But these last 3 years in particular, there's run rules all the time. So even when they were winning a lot this year, it was kind of like, where are the run rules? Again, the bar is so ridiculous. But these last couple of weekends, it's looked more recognizable. Like, oh yeah, they're still in. That team is still in there. And Kelly Maxwell on Saturday, just to completely dominate 6 innings, and then they go to Keeney. It was right, and it got wobbly, and then she comes in and just like cleans it up, shut the door. Like, okay, I guess I'll finish it. That was such a baller move to
that was
this great game, come out and they had to get put back in, and then just immediately boom, over.
That was so weird. Like, Kelly Maxwell dominated throughout the 6 innings that she pitched, and then Carly Keeney comes in, who hasn't given up a run all of this month, like just hasn't. And the first 3 batters, you get a home run, a double, and then an RBI single. It's like, okay, all right, let's change back. And so I kind of was weird on the stats. Like, she pitched all 7 innings technically then, because she got all 3 out. So it's just like it was weird at the time, like trying to figure that out. But that it was a different situation. It was different.
Unbelievable. Yeah. So she's her pitching at a high level right now is obviously a great news. Like you said, Nicole May. So it was a lot to like. And now this weekend you go to the Supers, Florida State, which again, when the bracket came out, we people looked at that.
We had assumed,
boy.
We assumed it was Florida.
Here we are now, the 2-15. Obviously, these 2 teams met in the National Championship Series last year and in 2021. So 2 of the last 3 National Championship Series, the finals of the WCWS, were literally these 2 teams. So you obviously winning both. And now they meet in a best 2 of 3 in Norman for a spot in OKC. Obviously, extremely attractive matchup. The games are all going to be I think they're all scheduled for prime time national TV. I'm pretty sure. I think
the Thursday 6 p.m. first pitch is for the Super Regional. Is what they
on
got.
Thursday. So only I think 2 of the series start on Thursday, and OU's one of them. OU Florida State, because this is arguably the most attractive Super Regional matchup, I think, for a lot of softball fans. Some thoughts from you going into that. Obviously, we don't know, or I should say, we haven't heard from Patty Gass or anything like that. They haven't had their pre-series press conference yet. But some thoughts from you going into this, and obviously you were there last year, right, in Oklahoma City when they beat this Florida State team to the national title. And now here you go, part 3 between these 2, this kind of saga. And Florida State's going to want this so bad to come to Norman and try and do this. Some thoughts going into this weekend. It should be a really fun, a couple or maybe even 3 games.
I mean, as I've said, if OU can play the way they played over this weekend, there's nobody that can beat them. And I stand by that statement. Now, if they don't come out and play that way, that's the scary part, because this is a Florida State team that obviously knows how to win. They know how to get to the big game. And so that's what could be scary about this matchup here, because you got a team that especially wants to get back at Oklahoma for what happened last year and the way they ended the season. And so that's what's most nerve-wracking about this. I mean, but like I said, if OU plays the way they should play, it should be okay for them. Especially they're at home, they're in Norman, they get 3 chances to win 2 games. They can do it. So that's what's going to have to be in this situation. That's all it is. Yeah.
No, I mean, that Florida State, I mean, the edge that they're going to have is hard to replicate, because we talk about this in other sports a lot of times where there's just like certain teams. It's like if that team didn't exist, that team would probably have multiple titles. You talk about that in other sports, like in football now with the Chiefs. It's like the Bills and the Ravens probably would have broken through by now, but Mahomes keeps getting in the way. Talk about it in the NBA with LeBron for so many years. That is Oklahoma for Florida State. Florida State's probably feeling like if OU just didn't exist, we would be Oklahoma. I mean, we would probably have 2 national titles in the last 3 years. So to have this opportunity, it's going to be insane. The crowd in Norman, the biggest games that Love's Field has obviously had in its brief history. It's going to be nuts. It's going to be nuts. It's going to be really cool. And you'll be there. The environment will be awesome. You've been having great softball coverage, obviously, throughout the season, but obviously, especially in the postseason. So we're looking forward to more of that this week. Should be really cool. And then it's on to OKC after that. So,
I'm honestly, I want to know what I'm curious to see what Patty Gasso says about this series. I can't wait till tomorrow when we have our press conference and things like that. And I'll have that on the board for the VIP subscribers. So make sure another reason to subscribe right there. It's gonna be really interesting because after the Oregon game, Patty Gasso said, "You know what? I'll just come out and say it now that it's over." I was actually nervous having Oregon in that in that bracket because they have so many Oklahoma ties, like the coaches and the coaching staff, all the players.
Romero,
they know exactly what we do. Like they're so familiar with us. They know what we don't like, what we do like. And so I think in Florida State, you get that as well because it's a team that has tried to scout you so many times because it's always the big game between you all.
Yeah.
So I think that could be, an interesting wrinkle in this. I want to know what Patty Gasso is going to say. She's not going to admit that before the series, obviously, but it's something to think about.
Yeah, a lot of familiarity there for sure. So it'll be a fun series. Look forward to it. Starts on Thursday night. Again, we'll repeat that. Thursday night. There at Loves Field, and Norman James will be there. As far as baseball, just a couple of thoughts from me real quick. Not a whole lot of new ground to cover here. The team is really good. They went into Cincinnati, and they had a doubleheader. Again, they had already clinched the Big 12. We talked about that last week. So the series was really just for bolstering your resume, right, for the postseason.
Yep.
They played a doubleheader on Thursday again. That was their sixth doubleheader of the year. The weather has been crazy this season. They swept the doubleheader, though. They continue to mash. Friday, they pretty much, I don't want to say they punted the game. That would be an overstatement. But they sat a lot of guys. They rested some guys. Bryce Madron had a little tweak on Thursday, so they rested him on Friday. John Spikeman rested on Friday. It was kind of a half lineup. And they tried to kind of just bullpen their way through it. And they were up 6-0, and then it got away from them. Cincinnati ended up coming back and winning that game. Doesn't really change anything, in my opinion. I mean, they still won the series in Cincinnati. It was an 8-game winning streak going into that. They've won the Big 12 going away. I think it's an absolute lock. And if it's not, then I'll look silly, I guess. But I think it's an absolute lock. They're going to host a regional at this point. Mm-hmm. It's really just a matter of can they get to that top 8 super regional line, and they have a shot at it. I think if they go deep in Arlington this week, the Big 12 tournament, they'll have a shot. If they can get to the finals, basically I think it's where it's at for me. If they get to the finals and lose, it'll be close. If they lose before the finals, I don't think they'll get there. If they win the tournament, they'll get it. I think that's probably pretty safe to say. So that's where I'm kind of at with them. If they can get 2 or 3 wins in Arlington, I think they'll be right there for that conversation. D1 Baseball's rankings came out this morning. They're number 8 in the rankings. Now, that's not a projection, different. These are just their top 25, but at them number 8. So it kind of tells you where they're at. They're right on that bubble for that top 8. But yeah, the team's really good. They just got to get healthy, frankly. Had a couple of injuries you don't want to have, especially Bryce Madron. So hopefully he's good. They'll start the Big 12 tournament on Wednesday in Arlington. And I'll be heading down there tomorrow. So I'll have boots on the ground coverage throughout the week there at the Big 12 tournament. And we'll see what they can do in Arlington. Like I said, I mean, they won the Big 12. They're way in the tournament. That's not even a question. Mm-hmm. And I think they're going to host the regional. I feel pretty confident about that. It's just a matter of can they get to that top 8? Mm-hmm. That'll be the question this week in Arlington. But team's playing really well. And there's hitting and, there's a lot to like, obviously. All the things I've said before. Nothing's really changed after that weekend there in Cincinnati. So good team, obviously. I think that's it. Again, we're going to have lots of Diamond Sports coverage the rest of the way. James will be in Norman this weekend. I'll be in Arlington. We'll continue to keep up with football portal, and basketball seems to have the dust kind of settled. We're still waiting on that Jalen Moore, but again, anything that happens, we'll have it for you, both on the website, as soon as illustrated, all that VIP intel for the various sports, as well as just the latest news, and you'll always be up to date if you keep up with the site and you subscribe. And be sure to listen to the show regularly every Monday, Thursday. I'll be back later this week. That might get moved around depending on Big 12 tournament schedule. We'll have to kind of figure that out. So keep an eye out for later this week, Thursday or Friday or so with Colin and I. I'll hit some recruiting news and things like that. But we'll be back later this week in some form or fashion at some point. So just kind of stay on your toes for when that show might drop later this week. And then the 3 of us, Tom, and then us 2, will be back next probably Monday. To recap the weekends for the Diamond Sports and football and everything else that you come to know and expect on the show here. So That's it for now. For James D. Jackson, Tom Green earlier, I'm Josh Callaway. We'll see you guys next time right back here on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.
See you.